So welcome to a new program. On today's show, we analyze the victory of Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador in the Mexico presidential elections. Our guest, Jesse Franzblau, policy analyst working on U.S. policy towards Latin America. Jesse, a warm welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jorge.
Jesse, in recent days, Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, through Twitter, was inviting President Trump to his inauguration on December the 1st, and also he said that he's invited Trudeau of Canada, Maduro of Venezuela, and Pérez Canel from Cuba. He said in order to improve the friendship and the relations of all the countries of the world. Do you think that President Trump is going to attend?
It seems so. I mean, initially, President Trump did offer a congratulatory tweet saying that he looks forward to working with Lopez Obrador and that, that he sees it as a positive, step for Mexico. It's hard to tell. It's hard to analyze what goes through President Trump's mind, but it does seem that Lopez Obrador is taking some pretty measured steps to be conciliatory, to maintain and strengthen relationships with other presidents, with other world leaders, and it seems he does want to be a unifying force, a unifying figure that brings together leaders, from the region in a way that could be positive, and so it'll be very curious to see what type of if the president of the U.S. attends.
And any good feeling in terms of if the relations with Mexico, with his new neighbor, are going to be better, worse, same as with Peña Nieto?
I think they'll change. It's hard to, I think, say whether they'll be worse or better in terms of whose perspective is worse and whose is better. But I do think that will change. I think the relationship on a number of policies is going to shift. In terms of what people are predicting, I think there are a lot of areas that things will change, but I don't know. It's hard to say to what extent they'll become worse or they'll become better.
You and I, we've been in Mexico precisely during the days of the election, the previous days and also the days after. How do you explain what happened?
It seems that from what I gathered from the expression of people on the ground really in Mexico is that this has been something in the works for a lot of years. I think going back decades, but going back just to 1988 when there was very big election fraud that was pretty well known, when the pre-government really, it was quite blatant, the fraud that happened in '88. And at that time, Lopez Obrador was in the pre-party, of course, and then left the party. And since then, there's been a driving movement, and before that, there's been a driving, I think, social movement to really have a different structure of power, to really change the structure of power. And I think the big thing is the level of violence and the level of corruption that folks face every day. A big driving hope for change, for something different.
Well, there are two readings. That one of the reasons why he won so overwhelmingly, we're talking about 53% of the vote against like 20-something, like 25 of the second one, and 17 from the guy that was representing the government's party, the PRI, is that the corruption in the 6-year terms of Peña Nieto has been really blatant, very open. There are cases of what they call the White House, and also, for example, as you mentioned, the violence. The last 10 years has been the more violent, and this previous year, 2017, the most violent of them all. Since the last 10 years, for about at least 200,000 people killed, about 37,000 people disappeared, and that was a factor. On the other hand, they say that the factor was that the electorate was maturing and it get much more awareness of the need of a change. What do you think?
I think all of those factors. I think particularly after 2006, when a lot of people say that Lopez Obrador won that election against Calderon, and then afterwards, the heightening up of the drug war and of the U.S. influence in the drug war, and the ratcheting up of the military being deployed to the streets, and just the increase in violence and the increased kind of mafia networks that the government has entailed with cartel-like structures. I think the last, since 2006, there's been a growing need a growing desire for change, for a shift.
There are people who think that the Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, they call it AMLO, because of his, the first letters of his name of 2018 is not the same one that the one of 2006, that the third was a charm. Do you believe that he has changed or his position?
I think he's changed. I mean, his obviously, political affiliation has changed, at least with with the parties. Being with the PRD party up until creating the Morena party, and I think also what happened in the last few years, as you say, with a just growing level of awareness of corruption with the Peña Nieto government, of the Casa Blanca scandal, the mansion that was exposed by Carmen Aristegui and the journalist, and then the firing of journalists that really came down. That was pretty clear. The pressure
$7 million
came down,
house,
and a $7 million. I mean, the level of the scandal there, and the handling of human rights cases. The case of the Ayotzinapa students, 43 students disappeared, and the level of impunity that the government has protected those responsible, and the clear military and police involvement in these human rights atrocities again and again, and this pact of impunity in the pre-government and in the other parties. I think people have really, there's been a big backlash against that, and there's been a real hope that that's.
And there also the perception that that definitely he reached the government, but the power is still in the hands of the big, large 1% of corporations, on the big people who manage the finances and the business in Mexico. So far, it looks like a pretty smooth transition between his speech or his promises that were very, if you say, explosive, and the interests of the businessmen. So how you conceal such a opposite view of the future of Mexico?
It seems like AMLO is definitely being very careful to not create any huge waves now. I think there's an understanding that there's a pretty precarious economic kind of power to balance, and I think he's made some pretty clear statements that he's not going to immediately create huge waves with the economic situation. He said his advisors have said that they're not going to change the semi-privatization of Pemex and the investment coming from international companies there, at least right away. But it seems like, outside of that, he's focused a lot on internal social development programs.
What he's saying is he's not going to touch, if you want, quote unquote, the wealth, if you want, of the rich. Only stopping corruption, they're going to get so much money that they could be able to implement social programs, and everybody could benefit from a prosperous country. Only fighting corruption. Do you believe that could be possible?
I think if he is actually capable, if the new government is actually capable of taking all the profits that are going towards corruption in the hands of government officials and divesting those towards social programs, I think that could absolutely amount to billions. But I also think, the way that he governed Mexico City also was actually, he had a pretty close relationship with the business elite. It was, he dealt with kind of the economic interest to help increase investment, social development, economic development within Mexico City. So, in that sense, if you look at that, it seems like there'll be kind of a multi-faceted, approach to it, where he, will stay, kind of cozy with, with the economic powers at play, with the business elite, in order to secure investment and maintain growth, or to increase growth. But it sounds like a big focus, from what he said, is going to be on internal social development programs. So big plans to create scholarships for kids, throughout the country. Economic subsistence programs. Any renegotiation that happens with, on the trade front, make sure to include, protections for Mexican farmers, for internal, economic development. So I think there'll be a lot of changes there, but he doesn't seem to be, kind of rocking the boat, as it seems, in terms of economic confidence from the business elite.
He won the presidential election, most definitely by shellacking, and most definitely he also won big time all over the country. And you were observing the election, and you were precisely where?
In Morelos.
In Morelos. How did you perceive that not only he won the presidential election, but almost a huge change, a huge victory throughout the country, throughout the governorships, throughout the local governments, throughout he won the majority in the chambers of deputies, what we call here the House of Representatives, and he also won the Senate. How do you explain that?
It was pretty incredible to see the level that Morena won at the local level, because especially in places, so Morelos has a very strong PRD control. The party that Lopez Obrador used to be with. There's a pretty strong control there of that party, and there aren't the same, there isn't the same level of structural base that the PRD has, because Morena being a very quite new party. But the way that they mobilized and the support for this new party was pretty impressive to see. And there was definitely pretty clear vote buying that was happening. There were several instances, that we heard and that we saw of mobilizing public funds to encourage voting towards political parties away from Morena. But in the end, the outpouring and the people showing up and voting for Lopez Obrador's party was pretty stunning to see. So the overwhelming mandate at the local level and at the federal level, at the congressional level, as you say, is pretty stunning to see.
If you have to choose one image or one picture of what impressed you the most of what you witnessed when you were in Morelos, just staying during that day of the presidential elections, or the elections in general, which one would be?
I mean, the level of participation and engagement that people were really driving in Morelos, and we were in Cuernavaca, and then we were close to Tlayacapan, another town nearby, an hour away from Cuernavaca. The level of engagement and participation was pretty impressive to see. There was it was the opposite of apathy in terms of people really cared.
And this happens in a country where it's not mandatory the voting, and 63% of the people, the 89 million that were able to vote, did participate. It was a record. So it was also a message there.
It seems like it. If we could have that level of participation in our elections, it could be a drastically different situation. But of course, people are disillusioned. People are rightly disillusioned with their elected officials and with the way the system works. And obviously, in Mexico, people have been disillusioned for years. But there was something that people saw a great, reason to go out. They saw a real reason to go out and vote. I think we saw that with the election of President Obama in 2008, the first time. There was a huge mobilization and people went out. I do think one risk is that, you know, after 8 years of President Obama, I think there was a lot of disillusionment of people with what happened and what didn't happen in terms of living up to expectations and in terms of
hope and change.
Of hope and change, when, you know, a lot of the status quo was really maintained. A lot of the status quo in terms of, you know, the military wars of aggression abroad, you know, the mass bulk spying, surveillance, you know, scandals, the you know, level of internal violence, you know, carried out by police forces. A lot of things sustained under that administration, and then now look where we are in this country. And so I think there's a risk that, you know, presidents where there's a lot of hope and there's a huge overwhelming mandate, that if, you know, the actions aren't carried out to actually live up to people's hope, then what happens? You know, then people lose kind of faith that, you know, that the system works in some way. So I think that's actually, you know, a concern.
Some of the people, of course, was off the records, but some of the members of the INE, the National Electoral Institute that was in charge of running the election in Mexico, was admitting that the narco-traffickers are so powerful that there were certain areas of Mexico that really ruled them, run the whole life, and so much so that they needed to get their permit, their permission to install ballots, polling places. And there was an issue that became just a controversy. One of the promises of Manuel Lopez Obrador to give an amnesty. And it was a little bit vague of what about the amnesty. And the interpretation of most of the people was that in a way he's going to try to negotiate with the narco-traffickers in order to put down the level of violence and the killings. What do you think about that?
I think the approach to actually fighting corruption is going to be very complicated, because corruption and fighting, you know, the so-called cartels in Mexico is really rooting out the mafia structures. So you're dealing with entire governmental, police, and military structures that are part of the narco control, that are, you know, they're part of this cartel structures. It's really not, you know, government versus cartel. It's kind of the government structures as the cartels there. And so you're really dealing with more of a kind of paramilitary structure that you have to root out. So that it may take in some form negotiation, may take in some form, you know, amnesty, in the sense that you can't, it's, you know, virtually impossible to purge entire security forces. I mean, I do think that in order to achieve, you know, a break in the corruption, there, you know, has to be an enormous level of purging the security institutions and probably, you know, dismantling some of the security forces, changing form, you know, taking, you know, I think the military out of internal policing. I think, you know, breaking away from a lot of the kind of U.S.-guided drug war, counter-drug programs that have really actually funded and fueled. I think from what I've, you know, just researched over the years and written about, a lot of the corruption and a lot of the impunity and a lot of the connection between, you know, the government security forces and the drug trafficking, you know, itself. So I think if it's some kind of negotiation, some kind of pact, I think that might be, I mean, that's essentially what it was before. There was, you know, kind of an agreement before, you know, Felipe Calderon took office and really went toward this very hard driving practice that took out, you know, the leaders of these cartels, and then, you know, the drug trafficking splintered into this very just extraordinarily violent situation. And I think people are just absolutely exhausted by that situation.
One of the issues that also is controversial in the relationship between Mexico and the U.S. is immigration. Already, AMLO has said that he was talking to President Trump for about half an hour, and he said, and it was cordial, and I was mentioning to him the need to create jobs, good jobs in Mexico, so people don't have to to leave to the United States. And Trump, even the first day that he announced his candidacy, he painted the Mexicans as a worst thing in this face of the earth. Do you think that is going to be one of the most controversial issues to solve between the two presidents?
Lopez Obrador seems to be quite, I think, careful, so far in how he's managing and what he's saying that the policies are going to be. Trump has in his mind that Mexico is going to continue to carry out, this very strong, aggressive, anti-immigrant type of policy that the U.S. Has essentially implemented in Mexico for years. Especially what's come with the ratcheting up of this counter-drug programs. The U.S. has also orchestrated a very extreme border security program all throughout Mexico and through Mexico's southern border. And so, it's been this extension of the U.S.-Mexico border down to the Mexico-Guatemala border, to the point where, Mexico has been, detaining, migrants coming from Central America, essentially at the behest of the U.S. in private, security detention facilities that are from, that are run by U.S. companies. I mean, in terms of, restoring or bringing a level of sovereignty, to Mexico, that would entail a big change in adhering or not adhering, to this, to this U.S. this very hardline, extreme U.S. Securitization of this migration policy, and transforming it to a humanitarian approach to immigration, rather than treating it as a security issue, where the U.S. is holding people in detention camps and facilities here. I mean, we've
almost
seen
like cages.
In cages. I mean, they're. We've seen, the outcry, over the treatment of children at the border. I mean, the ripping children apart from their family members at the border that this administration is implementing. But that, a lot of this was happening in the last administration. A lot of this has been pushed down into Mexico. And so this has become, Mexico's immigration policy at the behest a lot of U.S. And so changing that, I think there's a lot of hope that that's going to change, that Mexico will treat immigration, as a humanitarian issue and treat security issues as security issues. I mean, one big thing that Mexico, should do is secure the Mexico-U.S. border from U.S. arms flowing south. Coming from these gun shows and I mean, the exorbitant amount of weapons
in the border states.
The border states, the weapons that are flowing from the north to the south into Mexico, flooding the violence. That's something that the Mexico, in terms of a security issue, would be incredibly important to stop that, secure that.
What do you think there's going to be the impact in terms of geopolitical strategies, left and right, and progressive governments in Latin America were taking also a big loss in terms of the right wing gaining momentum? What do you think that this is going to play in that?
I think this could be a real transformative shift in the region in terms of this tide kind of to the right that's been happening a lot in the region. Just thinking about what happened in Honduras in the fall, when it was clearly a stolen election it was very blatant fraud. And you had the government of Mexico in front of the OAS, essentially backing the Juan Orlando government, essentially saying, no, we're gonna recognize this. Of course, again, a lot of that at the behest of the U.S.
And try to overturn the government of Venezuela
sure.
through a group of Lima.
Sure, right.
Leading by Mexico.
Right. So changing that, having a representative from Mexico, from the Lopez Obrador government, saying, no to the U.S. We're not going to carry out your objectives in Latin America. We're not going to back these right-wing elections, stolen elections like what happens in Honduras. We're not going to back aggression towards Venezuela and other countries. Could be a pretty enormous transformative shift in the region.
Well, Jesse Franzblau, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jorge.
Telesur brings you special interviews with social and political personalities. Monday, From Washington.